Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in game as well. For these videos I like to use your suggestions of monsters that you'd like to see me draw, so make sure to leave a creature that you'd love to see a video about down below in the comment section, because I take every single one of your suggestions, whether it's super obscure or really popular. Even if it's something that's not actually in D&D yet, or if it's in one of its kind of sister books like the Kobold Press series. And I add it to my to-draw list, and then I hand that to-draw list over to my patrons every single month, who then vote on which ones of your monster suggestions they'd like to see in what order. So make sure to join the community, leave a suggestion down below, and if you want to help me make these videos and get a little bit more control over which ones come up in what order, then I'll leave a link down below to my Patreon page. So thank you very much for your support if you choose to do that. Now today's suggestion of Ettins first came to us from the fantastically named Kendo Weeb in the YouTube comments. Thank you so much for your brilliant name and for your suggestion, Kendo. And that was made just about a year ago, but I've been incredibly excited to cover this one because, well, A, it actually crosses off one of Yorik's many giant suggestions. One of my patrons, Yorik, leaves me about 3 giant suggestions every hour on my Discord or some other means of contacting me. So the giant list is getting huge and I need to cover some of these giants. But also because Ettins are some of the most fascinating creatures in D&D. They're really bizarre giants. Or are they even giants? Let's find out. Let's start the video, dive into the lore of Ettins. So, I won't talk tons about the mythology of giants themselves in the real world, because I've covered a lot of that information and a lot of in-game lore about giants themselves in my Frost Giant Monster Monday. So I'll make sure to leave a link to that at the end of this video so you can catch up if that's something that you're interested in. But today I'm going to primarily talk about the Ettin itself. The concept of the Ettin can likely trace its ancestry back to the Jotuns of Norse mythology, a mythological creature that has split in modern consciousness into various things like frost giants and trolls as well. In the original Norse, the word used to denote the enemies of the gods. They were the Jotnar, a word which throughout history has generally meant something in the neighbourhood of devil, evil spirit, enormous and also consuming, which seems to really cover the attitude and idea behind the Ettin very well. The root word went on to become Eoten in Old English, meaning giant monster or enemy, and eventually settled on Ettin, E-T-E-N in Middle English, changing again to Ettin, E-T-T-I-N, sometime in medieval history. Ettins are primal and savage giants who are more brutal than most of their kin and are superficially said to resemble ogres in stature and in might. However, the key feature that marks this creature as separate from their ogre cousins is their most distinctive feature, the fact that they have not one, but 2 different heads. All of Ettin kind share this common feature of having 2 heads attached to the same body, but unfortunately for these poor creatures, both heads can contain utterly separate and usually completely divergent personalities, which constantly bicker and argue with one another. They are the get-along sweater of monsters. As a result of their conflicting personalities, their ineloquence and savagery, these creatures are usually caused to drive themselves into solitude, having a hard enough time dealing with their own personal disputes between their 2 personalities without having to contend with the whole of society that may contain similar creatures. So they don't necessarily have their own kind of culture and definitely won't be living in tribes or groups of other Ettins. They prefer to live in caves, well away from even the fringes of society. They only seek out other creatures as a source of food, or if they have the sudden urge to procreate. In such circumstances, we're told that it's usually the female who seeks out the male, and in a brutal contest of strength, the female will seek to assert her dominance over the male, at which point they will become a couple very briefly. It takes only 6 months for a baby Ettin to be born, after which point we're told that according to the monster manual, the male is released from apparent servitude to the female Ettin, at least that's what the monster manual says, and resumes his previous life. And the female Ettin is left responsible for teaching this young Ettin how to hunt. Once the child has proven that it can hunt for itself, the female utterly abandons its child, leaving it with only its other head for companionship. Something that we're told that the young Ettin actually prefers, because again, they're constantly arguing with themselves, and all other Ettins are doing the same, and they don't really need more arguments in their life. They like to keep things simple. To this effect, Ettins are not welcome in the rigid social structure of giant kind known as the Ordning, something that even ogres and furbolgs technically have a place on. The Ordning is something that I've talked about in depth before in my Frost Giant Monster Monday, so I won't go into it in too much depth, but simply put, it's a caste system, where giants are placed essentially in basically height order. Generally, the taller that a giant is, the more respect it commands from those physically beneath it. The lowliest and most downtrodden member of a taller species is considered the commander or superior of the most noble and powerful giant of the species below it in the order. And this is very likely because Ettins are potentially not actually giants, despite the fact that they clearly resemble them and do speak giant as a language. Depictions of Ettins show them as tusked beasts with small noses and large protruding foreheads, not unlike a Neanderthal, although obviously Neanderthals didn't have tusks. That's totally not where I'm going with this. You know what I mean. But superficially, aside from their size and their multiple heads, this description also matches another type of creature in D&D. That's right, orcs. In the monster manual, where these creatures appear in 5th edition, we are told, and I quote, that in ancient dialects of Common, the word Ettin translates as ugly giant. Legends tell of orcs that once stumbled upon the temple of Demogorgon, the magic of which transformed them into giant mockeries of the twin-headed prince of demons. Driven to near madness, these creatures scattered into the wilderness to become the first Ettins. Whatever the truth of the Ettins' origins, orcs treat them as distant cousins, and orc tribes often entice Ettins to serve them as guards, scouts, or marauders. An Ettin isn't particularly loyal to its orc handlers, but the orc can win it over with the promise of food and loot. And honestly, no wonder. As an orc, I'd want to keep one of these things handy because they are absolutely brutal. They're too big and too uncultured to really craft armor for themselves, but what little they manage to accumulate over years of eating people and stealing their shields and things like that to strap onto themselves as armor, or furs of massive beasts, they have a 12 armor class, which isn't great because there's a massive amount of exposed flesh and they're a very obvious target, but they still have 10d10 plus 30 hit points, which is a really massive amount for a challenge rating 4 creature in D&D. They're really, really unintelligent, with -2 intelligence. Their score is 6, which puts them 2 away from being as dumb as an animal, basically. But they are capable of language, speaking both giant and orc. They really come into their own with their strength, which is 21, so they get a +5 in strength. And also, they have +4 in perception because they have 2 heads. In a rule called 2 heads, we're told that they have advantage on wisdom perception checks and on saving throws against being blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, stunned, and knocked unconscious because, I suppose, a bit like the 2 sides of a dolphin's brain, if one of them goes unconscious, the other one can stay active. Otherwise, they have a multi-attack, dealing 2 attacks per round, one with a battle axe and one with a morning star. The battle axe deals 2d8 plus 5 slashing damage, and the morning star deals 2d8 plus 5 piercing damage. I feel like both heads having utterly separate personalities, it's very likely that this multi-attack would be dealt to 2 different creatures though, whoever is being the focus of one of each of the heads. Their personalities are so separate that Ettins actually have 2 different names inhabiting the same body, each head having its own name, its own personality, and creatures who meet these Ettins tend to call them an amalgam of both names fused together. If the left head is called John and the right head is called Richard, a creature who's familiar with this Ettin might call it John Richard. And the order of those 2 names, which name comes first, I'm sure would be the cause of much dispute between the Ettins. Their low intelligence is definitely the key to defeating these creatures at low levels. They bicker and argue amongst each other. So I feel if you have a bard or a rogue, a sorcerer, anyone who's got a decently high charisma, is able to talk their way out of situations, you could very easily bypass a combat encounter with an Ettin if you manage to cause confusion or a dispute between the 2 heads. Something that I wanted to capture in my drawing here. I wanted the 2 heads to have 2 very different personalities. I wanted them to look quite different, while still maintaining the essential orc-like qualities that we know they're supposed to have. I like my orcs to have very swine-like noses. Orcs were originally derived from sort of pig-like creatures, and I like my orcs to have very, very green skin, so I made sure to include that. But just like the Demogorgon, a creature who is believed to be responsible for fusing orcs together to create these monstrosities, I wanted to make sure that there was some kind of gradient to the skin, some sort of shift and change. I'd really hoped to go for some really wild colours like red or pink skin, or something to maybe make them a little bit un-orc-like, but really the essence of what it is to be an orc does settle on green skin for me, so that's what I end up doing for these guys. But I also wanted to show this kind of demonic influence, that potentially it is demonic magic and not giant-like origins that caused these creatures to be. So I wanted to give them big old horns, maybe the odd demonic like scaling or bony protrusions from their arms in very random and mad locations, because again, this is Demogorgon. Let's not make it too ordered and even and symmetrical. I also thought I'd draw a female Ettin, because when was the last time you saw one of those drawn? I feel like there's a lot of creatures that you always see sort of drawn as the same sex over and over again. And I'm intrigued to see what the other kind would look like. You know, like you always see sort of female driders, and most of giant kind tends to be, at least in my experience, it may be different from other people, but in my experience I tend to see a lot of male giants. And with female Ettins being supposedly the dominant in their, I guess, culture, I thought I'd draw one. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you enjoyed this drawing. If you did, I hope you'll leave a little like down below, perhaps favourite this video and share it with the rest of your D&D party, just in case your DM's going to throw an Ettin at you. You'll need to be prepared and ready to talk your way out of that encounter, or at least distract one of the heads with something. If you'd like to see more videos from me, make sure to subscribe, because I release videos every single Monday, and I'd love for you to join this little community. Speaking of which, one of my two heads is reminding me to inform you guys that I have another community over on Patreon, where my patrons support me financially and help me to make these videos for you every single week, because YouTube ad revenue is only as high as an Ettin's intelligence. So if you'd like to contribute, if you'd like to help me make these videos every single week, if you enjoy them and you think they're good quality, I'd really appreciate your support so that I can keep making them. But don't worry, this isn't a purely selfish endeavour. I also offer my patrons additional stuff, like one-on-one chats with me and copies of all of my illustrations every single month, including this one if you'd like a copy for yourself. And you'll see in just a second that I add most of my patrons to the credits at the end of my videos for helping me to make this stuff. So if you'd like your name present in all of my videos, or any of those other awards sound appealing to you, or you simply just want to help me make these videos, I'll make sure to leave my Patreon page, or a link to it rather, down in my description box. But anyway, until next Monday, I hope you and your other half don't bicker as much as the two heads of an Ettin, and happy monster hunting.